Good evening and welcome to all our viewers, as well as those of you joining us on our Facebook live stream. I'm your host, Roodi Balgobin.
And I am your co-host, Juan Edghill Jr. Good evening.
On tonight's edition of This Week in 60 Minutes, we'd ask the very important question, are your lives better now compared to pre-May 2015?
Tonight we look at the topic, 4 years later, missteps and abuses expose the true nature of the APNU-AFC coalition government.
True.
So the issues of crime and conflict of interests, which we touched on last week, remain a major cause for concern, among others, for Guyanese. Now, crime is just one of the issues we looked at last week.
Yes,
Rudy.
I know I wasn't here last week. I was in Trinidad at the CCJ.
Yes. So we discovered last week that there is still no report, the quarterly report on crime stats. It has not been issued as yet. We also addressed Minister of Public Security, Mr. Cameron Dramjatan, his failures in addressing the crime situation. We also found that the government's approach to crime has not been a hands-on approach that they have taken on crime. And we also spoke on the rhetoric that was there pre-2015, which said that crime was a PPP problem, or the PPP's fault is why crime was existence back then. But we found that crime is actually still prevalent in 2019. The coalition would have said that they had all the solutions to the crime issues.
Definitely, I recall them saying that.
But we still find in 2019 that crime is still a major issue and a major cause of concern for most Guyanese, and the government has not really addressed it. So.
On that note, on Tuesday we saw another move by the Granger-led coalition government that further undermines any confidence that the Guyanese people would have had in this administration. Another 3 positions were created to keep the ministers who resigned because of their dual citizenship.
Yes.
It was predicted that sinecure positions would have been crafted. We already saw the position that was created for Mr. Joseph Harmon. He is now the Director General of the Ministry of the Presidency. As expected, Mr. Carl Greenidge has been appointed Foreign Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Son-in-law to the President, David Granger, Mr. Dominic Gaskin has been appointed Director of Manufacturing and Marketing within the Ministry of Business. Dr. Rupert Roopnarayan has been appointed Director of Public Service Training within the Ministry of the Presidency. Now the question is, how much more will it cost us to carry these 4 men in their newly created positions? 10 million a month, 15 million a month, 20 million a month? Now these are questions that are very important to the Guyanese people, which we'd like to get answers to. Additionally, what we know is that the salary and perks of the office will definitely cost the taxpayers millions of dollars every month.
Yes, Steve. Yes, Rudy. And we see there specifically that after resignation, there was a designation right away. We have to highlight this problem because we know right now that unemployment is a problem that is hitting the Guyanese economy really, really hard right now. And as soon as they resigned, there was an appointment made for them almost immediately.
Exactly.
The question of how taxpayers' monies are used has also been asked in relation to the cases that were heard by the Caribbean Court of Justice last week. Today, letters sent to the State Assets Recovery Agency, the Public Procurement Commission, and the Auditor General's Office calling for an investigation into the use of taxpayers' monies to fund a private appeal at the Caribbean Court of Justice, and this is by Compton Reed. Now, the letter signed by People's Progressive Party Executive Ms. Gail Teixeira read, and I'm just gonna read a bit here. This is a complete departure from the financial rules and regulations, as the state is not allowed to use public funds to pay for a private legal action brought by a private citizen. It is therefore inappropriate and I believe illegal for the state to use taxpayers' money to pay for a private action. I am therefore lodging a formal complaint and asking that this matter be investigated by SARA. By copy of this letter, I'm also alerting the Auditor General of Guyana and the Chairperson of the Public Procurement Commission with regards to this matter. In anticipation that I may be asked to provide further information, may I suggest that a simple request to pursue the expenditures of the Attorney General's Office, which is the Ministry of Legal Affairs, and the Ministry of the Presidency, commencing from January 2019 may prove useful in this regard. Now, how these agencies will respond to this call for an investigation is left to be seen at this point in time.
Well, we know that Mr. Reed hired some very influential, some very
Prominent
top
lawyers,
prominent lawyers. We have
Yes.
Mr. Neil Boston,
Yes.
one of the lawyers that was representing him at the Caribbean Court of Justice. In fact, Mr. Boston, senior counsel, represented him in the High Court of Ghana and in the Court of Appeal of
Yes, he
Ghana.
did.
And further, another party was added at the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Yes.
Mr. Robert Corbyn, the
Yes.
former opposition leader, was also there at the Caribbean Court of Justice representing him. Now, a reasonable thinking Guyanese would know that these men are not doing this for free.
Yes,
No one is doing this for
of
free.
course not.
They won't go out of pocket to go all the way to Trinidad, rent these hotels, and then be there. On that note, we have 6 ministers were at the Caribbean Court of Justice in Trinidad last week. They were there in their official capacity at the court. They had their names reserved and designation.
Really?
Seats reserved for them at the Caribbean Court of Justice. And it now begs the question, who footed the bill for these ministers to attend the Caribbean Court of Justice? Interestingly, the 2 newly appointed ministers under the coalition government, Ms. Tabitha Sarabu-Haley and Mr. Hemraj Rajkumar was there as well. Now, as Guyanese would know, these ministers were recently appointed, not even 2 weeks into their appointment as ministers, and they left the jurisdiction of Ghana and sat for 2 days at the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Why were they there?
Doing absolutely nothing. Additionally, they were no doubt staying at 5-star hotels, dining, wining, and dining at possibly our expense. No one knows. The state has provided no answers to these questions, and there have been questions out there in the public domain in the forms of letters. These ministers also were using luxury vehicles. They have luxury SUV vehicles which they were using. As you can see on your screen there now, that's a Mercedes-Benz that were being used by some of the ministers that attended the Caribbean Court of Justice. Just below that, you have a Toyota Prado Land Cruiser that was being used by the Attorney General and others. We also have the Speaker of the National Assembly who was there using Mercedes-Benz and other high-end vehicles were being used by ministers as well, such as the BMW and these luxury vehicles. Yes, as you can see there on your screen.
So the trend or pattern of wasteful spending is one that has been evidenced for the last 4 years of the AP and UFC coalition being in office. And wasteful spending is just one of the ways or one of the things that have highlighted their failures in office. I have before me the manifesto plan, or the first 100 days program that they would have promised.
Yes, infamous 100 days.
Yes, they would have promised the Guyanese people. So I'm just going to read a few of their promises. There was the promise of significant salary increases for government workers, including nurses, teachers in primary, secondary, and tertiary education, security personnel, and civil servants on the traditional payroll. They promised the waiving of duties on fuel, tools, and small-scale mining equipment brought by identifiable holders of small concessions, the establishment of a national cane workers and cane farmers conference, the establishment of a national rice farmers and rice millers conference, and the establishment of task forces on crime and security and on road safety. Now, we know that from these promises that they would have given the Guyanese people, we know our present condition in 2019, and a lot of these promises have been failures. Indeed, we have highlighted at the start of the program that crime still remains a major issue in this country. We also noted that they would have promised a 20% salary increase, but they have not delivered on this promise.
They took 50% for themselves and neglected everyone else.
That's correct. And how have they treated the miners? They have added VAT on the equipment that they have to bring into the country. So what exactly is it that this government is really celebrating after 4 years? Or what do they have to show for their performance after 4 years being in government? I mean, you know, it begs the question.
Well, they characteristically put out a glowing statement of their achievements after 4 years in the government. And I just like to read some excerpt from this document. I couldn't believe as I read it. I think it's something that they're living in some other country, or they think that Guyanese does not understand the issues that we're facing. So, and I'm quoting directly from their document here. One part of the document, they said, avoiding public fanfare and triumphalism, the coalition government steered the country forward as a stable and growing economy, promoted and defended its sovereignty and territorial integrity, restored respect for Guyana as a democracy in which all human rights and press freedoms are protected, and supported and encouraged social cohesion among multi-ethnic, multicultural, and plural population.
Yes.
Over the past 4 years, the policies and programs of the coalition government have had favorable impact on every aspect of life in Guyana, from the coastland to the hinterland and in our rivering and indigenous communities. No government before has done more with such a short span of time. The APNU-AFC coalition government is pleased that it has given our senior citizens and working people a reassuring glimpse of the good life. Now, just to stick a pin there, we all know what happened as soon as this government took office as it relates to the pensioners and senior citizens of our country.
Yes.
They were given water subsidies
by
by the PP government for
they
water
were.
and electricity.
Yeah.
They immediately removed that subsidies. And in terms of increase, they got a measly $800 increase on their pension. As it relates to the aspect of improving your livelihood on the coast and the hinterland, we all know what has happened. The rice farmers, for example, cannot say that they have fared better under this government because they are the ones that the administration directly took their lands away and tried to give it to one of the PNC big guys in Region 5.
And the issue of jobs, Rudy.
Exactly.
We have lost so many jobs under this government, but I don't see them mentioning that they have taken away jobs from so many people in this country. I mean, how can you boast about increasing standard of living of a people and you're taking away jobs? Because jobs for one person affects a family, which affects a community, which will affect the entire region and the country by extension.
As in the case of the sugar workers, 7,500 dismissed, and we've all seen the hardship that these communities are facing. I'll continue along with their promise of jobs, and in their glowing statement here, they said, the APNU-AFC government has embarked on a program of clean, modern, and orderly development in the reflection of timely disposal of solid waste, construction of major new roads on the East Coast, West Coast of Demerara, and East Bank of Demerara, and the East Bank of Esquimalt Berbice that has been fitted with road lamps. Now, we have mentioned it on this program before that the East Coast, the West Coast, the East Bank, these are all projects of the PPP.
That's correct.
The airport, which they renegotiated and it ended up being a renovated airport, that's another PPP project.
Yes, small airport.
Yes, we end up with a smaller airport.
We're paying more money now.
Now, here's it that the government is taking credit for these work. They didn't negotiate any of these work. The Sheriff Street works that are currently ongoing, and we spoke about this in one of our earlier programs.
Yes, we did.
These are all projects of the PPP. In fact, the coalition government has not highlighted a single major project that they have negotiated, secure funding for, and all of this.
There has been none. There has been none.
Exactly.
And going back to this point about the infrastructure, not only was the plans in place, but the funding was already secured.
Exactly.
So they went into office having the money already there to do all of these projects.
It's just a matter of executing.
Yes,
and we all know how they've been executing these projects already.
Yes.
And just to highlight a few more things from their statement, since 2015, there has been incremental improvements in the delivery and reliability of electricity supply nationwide. Just last week, we had major blackouts here in Georgetown, over and over.
We had blackout on the program last week.
Exactly, there was blackout right here on the program. And they ended their statement by saying, in the social sectors, greater financial allocation for public education, health, and housing has been resulted in remarkable and better results. As it relates to the health sector, any Guyanese that you speak to across the length and breadth of Guyana will tell you that there are major shortages in the health sector. Just yesterday in the newspaper, you would have seen that those patients that did transplant, there are no drugs for them. In fact, one person died.
Wow.
And now there's a shortage of those drugs. There's been no statement from the government and no forthcoming from the Minister of Public Health. So after 4 years of failure, it is clear that Guyanese need a change, a real change. That chance for change may come in a favorable decision from the Caribbean Court of Justice. But locally, issues have surfaced with GECOM and its readiness for general and regional elections one day become due. At the CCJ, GECOM's attorney, Mr. Marcus, argued that GECOM has a planned course of action and it cannot deviate from that, regardless of the provisions of the Constitution, which were activated after the passage of the no confidence motion. Now we have a video clip of Mr. Marcus at the Caribbean Court of Justice. Let's listen.
The Elections Commission has to administer elections over 86,000 square miles, I think it is. It's over 80,000 square miles. It has been pointed out in the correspondence which Mr. Ram himself exhibited before this court, that the chairman has been writing to the President, His Excellency, the President, with respect to funding for the Commission. I do not think I need to belabor the point that funding is necessary to administer elections. And it was pointed out that having regard to the program of the Elections Commission, unanimously decided upon, there was the need for the revision of the list. While touching on the list, may I point out that the Commission has said, and I don't think it has been disputed or will be disputed, that there's a difference between the lists for local government elections and for general elections. And the exercise of the Commission was to update that list. A moment ago, my learned friend in addressing you spoke of the 2008 list, which was going to be revised and updated. And I think it speaks for itself when one says that a list that was compiled in 2008 by no stretch of the imagination could be valid for elections in 2018 or 2019. I think the court may take judicial notice of the fact that there is migration, there are deaths, there is remigration, and other factors that influence the population. There are those who come of age between 2008 and 2018. There will be many persons becoming of age. And therefore, it was important for the list to be updated. It has also been indicated by the Commission that by resolution, it was decided that they are going to have 6-month revisions and updatings, and that the last one occurred last year, and that the next one would be due later in the year 2019.
Okay, but Mr. Marcus, I understand your submissions.
Yes.
But there's a built-in tension in the Constitution, because Election Commission is independent, yes, and it would have its own strategic plan. It would know that, well, okay, we're going to have a revision of lists, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But the Constitution allows for a sudden a situation where suddenly, in disruption of all your well laid out plans, elections must be held within 3 months, because a vote of confidence or a vote of no confidence has taken place, and as a result, the natural consequence under the Constitution is that there must be an election. So it seems to me that the Commission must, at every stage, put itself in a position where within a 3-month time frame, it is able to handle an election, because that is always possible. And if that situation were to occur, then the normal strategic plan that you had of doing this in that time frame and doing that in that time frame would have to be adjusted.
Then, my Lord, may I say with respect, I would submit that, bearing in mind that elections occur on 5-yearly periods.
No, this is the point I'm making, Mr. Marcus. You see, that is the normal situation.
Yes.
But the Constitution makes provision for abnormal situations because the Constitution allows for votes of no confidence to be made and for Parliament to be dissolved, for the National Assembly to be dissolved. And the natural consequence of that is that you must have an election within 3 months. So the point I'm making is that while the Commission could have a plan for elections taking place every 5 years, which normally is the case, it must also have a plan just in the event that you have a situation as might well have been the case here.
Yes, when you know the parties are so close, 33, 32, there must be a serious danger of this emergency situation happening.
May I say, Your Honours, 1067 should be read as a whole. We should not emphasize only that aspect that says elections must be held within 3 months. The framers of the Constitution envisaged that you may have these extraordinary circumstances. And therefore they went on to say that you must have the elections within 3 months or such other time as the National Assembly may...
By a 2/3 margin. Suppose you can't get the 2/3.
So that, if I may put it this way, 3 months within Section 1, Article 107, is a directory period. It directs, it's for guidance. It's not absolute in a sense because implicit in the provision itself, it tells you that it is envisaged that this will not be possible or final. For one reason or other, one does not know what will happen. But you have got 3 months as a guide. The National Assembly may extend it depending
By a
on the
2/3
circumstances.
margin, not so?
Pardon me, my lord?
Isn't the extension by a 2/3 vote?
Yes, by the National
But
Assembly.
then suppose you don't get the 2/3 vote.
If you don't,
Yes.
It
then
demands 33, 32 between the
I
parties.
say, man, when these constitutions are free, it is expected that they will be administered with some level of maturity. And it is expected that the persons administering them will assure their functions in a mature manner.
Yes, and my point is that GECOM, as you said, is an independent commission. And if the persons in Parliament do not act, to use your words, with maturity, and it is not possible to get that 2/3 majority vote in order to extend the 3-month period, then what is GECOM's responsibility?
Lord Jesus, there will be a constitutional crisis. I'm so regret to say, if you cannot get the members of the National Assembly to act in a responsible and mature manner to do what's necessary, then we're going to have a constitutional crisis. If I may go on to say, it is really not for the court to exercise certain functions like naming a date and naming time frames. That is for His Excellency the President to name the date.
Well, that is what the Constitution does.
Yes.
3 months. I mean, that's not something we just come up with. That is what the Constitution says, 106(7),
Yes, my lord.
within 3 months.
Or such other time as the National Assembly might decide upon.
And we deal with eventualities here.
Which respect contemplates that eventualities might arise, necessitate an extension.
Correct.
And therefore it is expected that the persons concerned will behave in a particular way in dealing with that particular provision.
But
If we look at, if I may point out, if we look at the facts in this case, what we find is that certain persons were insisting on having elections by certain dates that rendered it impossible for the elections to be held in conformity with the Constitution, because there are certain things that have been laid down for GECOM to do, not only in the Constitution, but in the Representation of the People's Act. So you did not have the mature approach that you should have had. They are saying, let's have election in one case by the 30th of April. It was totally impossible by any stretch of the imagination because the parties were in courts. The courts had to make decisions. We are still in the courts with decisions, so it was impossible.
Well,
And there has
that's
been-
fine. That's fine.
Not been the
If the
majority.
matter is in court, then GECOM has to wait.
Yes.
But when the matter is no longer in court, then will GECOM be asking for more time other than outside the 3-month period?
Well, for one reason, from the facts as I know them and from the instructions I have been given, GECOM would have no alternative but to await the funding. It has been said in one of the letters to His Excellency, GECOM will be in a position to act upon receipt of the funding.
Okay, assuming that
What's the time
GECOM
of
got
us?
the funding, what is the shortest possible time within which GECOM can hold the elect, could manage an election?
If the funding is forthcoming, you know what?
Yes.
According to the correspondence with His Excellency, by October to November, completion of the task that they have allotted themselves unanimously by the members of the Commission. When we did not have the situation, the date was end of October, list available November 1.
Welcome back, viewers. We would like to apologize to our Facebook viewers who are not able to access the live video at this moment. However, we will post the video at a later time. Tonight with us in studio, we have opposition-nominated GECOM Commissioner Mr. Sase Gunraj. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Now, to kick things right into gear because of limited time, and we have Mr. Gunraj here with us, I'd like to ask you the first question. We have just heard from GECOM's attorney. What is your position relative to GECOM's compliance with the Constitution of Guyana, more so given that GECOM is a creature of the Constitution and it's subservient to the Constitution?
Well, Rudy, thank you again. Asking me about the submissions made by counsel for GECOM at the Caribbean Court of Justice just brings too many answers to mind. However, what the representative of GECOM in the person of Mr. Marcus, senior counsel, said to the judges is the least of my concern. What is of more concern to me and of more interest, I believe, to the citizens of Guyana is the response from the bench to the submissions from Mr. Marcus. Because it is clear that Mr. Marcus, senior counsel as he is, was out of his depth in the submissions that he was making to the court. And the questions that were asked by the judge, the president and the panel of the Caribbean Court of Justice, shows what right-thinking people, educated people, people without a biased view, understand of the system. And it is more than a coincidence that the questions posed by the president primarily, and by extension, Justices Anderson, Justice Witt, I want to say they were particularly brutal. But it is not, I don't believe that it, as brutal as it sounded, it shows what right-thinking people are thinking and are asking about this process. And it coincides with the positions that we have been taking ever since the successful passage of the no confidence motion in December 21, 2018. Why have we not taken steps? And this is a question that we have been beating all along. Why has the Guyana Elections Commission not taken steps from this 22nd of December 2018 to prepare for an election? That is a question that we have asked from day one, and we continue to ask it. And that question was echoed by no less a person than a member of that esteemed panel.
Yes.
So our position is, as it has always been, GECOM is born out of the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
Exactly.
Any law that is in violation or that is not in accord with the Constitution is void. And as a consequence, any action, any policy, any other thing that is ultra vires the Constitution or violates the Constitution, obviously ought to be treated like that.
Yes.
And so for Mr. Marcus to go purportedly representing GECOM, and like I said, it begs a lot of questions, but we'll get to that hopefully before time runs out, because there are lots of issues arising therefrom as well.
So GECOM's attorney also stressed the point of funding. And we know in August 2015, President Granger signed off Act 4 of 2015, which was the Fiscal Management and Accountability Amendment Act 2015. And we saw several other provisions, Article 222A of the Constitution, which speaks about funding to independent organizations and entities. So can Guyanese consider the talk of funding by these people to be an excuse or a delay tactic for the holding of general elections?
One, you'd recall that at the commission, we were met with excuse after excuse after excuse as to why the preparations for elections could not begin. As soon as this issue of funding arose, my first reaction was, both in the commission, where I make all my objections, and publicly, because obviously your objections are not being heard in there.
That's right.
And publicly, I stated that that was a contrived position, because it is my considered opinion that once funding is earmarked and appropriated by the National Assembly to an agency such as the Guyana Elections Commission,
GECOM,
which has a direct draw on the consolidated fund,
Yes, they do.
it is within the remit of GECOM to utilize those funds in keeping with its mandate. GECOM's mandate, as at the 21st of December 2018, after the passage of that no confidence vote, was to hold elections. And I said then, and as I will say now, this issue of house-to-house registration, which I am sure you will want to ask me about later on, this issue of house-to-house registration that seems to have taken preference over the holding of elections, it is tantamount, like I said earlier on in relation to the supremacy of the Constitution, it is tantamount to having a policy decision trump what the law says.
That's correct, and that's serious.
Of course, it is.
Serious.
And on this issue of funding, even the sums that were appropriated to the Guyana Elections Commission, and this is something that we raised in the commission, it is something that we raised publicly, it is something that we raised with His Excellency the President. You'd recall as well that the entire commission met with the President and a large delegation.
We recall that.
And we raised this issue that the said Fiscal Management and Accountability Act states that within 1 month of the appropriation being passed, that the entirety of that sum has to be made available to the agency for its use. At the time of meeting with His Excellency the President, 3 months had elapsed. Or I think it is in excess of 3 months, because the budget was passed before the no confidence motion. In excess of 3 months had elapsed, and in response to a direct question posed to the Chief Elections Officer, the answer was that the entirety of that sum was not made available to the agency. As I sit here, unfortunately, because, and we'll get to that hopefully again, the paucity of information that is made available to commissioners, we are unable to tell at this point whether that sum was eventually made or if it is made available to the commission up to the present time.
Okay.
Well, following up on the issue of funding, I'd just like to make it known here to the viewers that initially GECOM took a position where they weren't going to challenge any of these proceedings in the Caribbean Court of Justice. In fact, Ms. Excellence Dazzle appeared at the case management April 24th and said that they're not challenging anything. And then subsequently, they went ahead and Mr. Marcus appeared for the Guyana Elections Commission. Was this discussed at the level of the statutory meetings?
The short answer, Rudy, is no.
Okay.
At no time whatsoever was the hiring of counsel, representation of the Guyana Elections Commission at the Caribbean Court of Justice, even after it was brought to the attention of the entire commission that the Guyana Elections Commission, it was a matter of public notoriety, that the Guyana Elections Commission was added as a party to these proceedings, and strict timelines were set for the submissions to be made and all of that. An order to that effect, I'm aware, was served on the commission. Because these are matters of public nature. The proceedings before the CCJ were public. All the hearings were public. I myself was present, perhaps out of curiosity, but I would say out of interest, at one of those case management conferences, and I heard the orders being made by the runners. And GECOM did not take note of that, but Guyana is a small place. And what happens behind closed doors oftentimes finds itself in the public domain. I understand that a decision was taken behind closed doors by certain elements of the Guyana Elections Commission not to intervene into the proceedings and to abide by whatever outcome, because oftentimes regulatory agencies and agencies who do not have a combatant role in such proceedings oftentimes take the position of abiding by, because GECOM has a mandate to hold elections, and this was said by no other person than a judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Doesn't GECOM have a mandate to hold elections when it is, and I am not surprised that the Guyana Elections Commission is not aware that it has to hold elections within a certain time, or is aware of its mandate, because the lawyer Stanley Marcus, senior counsel, who, and I believe the clip just before this bore me out on this, stood up before an esteemed panel of judges that was being brought in a video that is being broadcasted, I believe, worldwide, to say that my version of the Constitution does not have these sections. The very sections you're going at this forum to represent the Guyana Elections Commission, and you're not seeing what gave birth to it? Come on.
Yeah, so you did just mention that GECOM has a mandate to hold elections, but according to GECOM, a new national house-to-house registration will be done in 5 months. This is what they're saying. With the new voters list being ready on November 1st, 2019, this is what they're saying. Is house-to-house registration possible within 5 months?
I am saying it is impossible. If you are going to do something, you ought to do it right. And if you are saying, if whoever is peddling that view, that we can have the product of a house-to-house registration within 5 months, they're deluded, to say the least. Because to have the house-to-house registration process has to be a detailed process.
It does have to.
Are you going to say we're going to make a one pass? So if, for example, last week, the house-to-house registration process was ongoing, and I found myself at the Caribbean Court of Justice, then I'll be denied that opportunity.
You'll be deregistered.
I know that the process allows for checking on the list to ensure that you are there and so on. But how much thoroughness can be facilitated if you were telling me that you're shoving this process down the throats of the Guyanese public to produce a product within 5 months? I would say that is impossible. It is impossible. And I don't want to telegraph what they will say, but I can reasonably expect that when the process starts, it will be used as another contrived method of delaying the holding of elections.
So this entire thing, as we can see, is geared at delaying the elections as far as possible. Now, from
Well, the elections have already been delayed by 5 months.
yes,
Because we've had 90 days elapse on the 31st of March, and then now we're into almost another 90 days elapsing.
Well, from the clip that we just looked at, we saw the esteemed Stanley Marcus saying that, and of course, I heard the Attorney General saying this to the Caribbean Court of Justice as well, that there was a unanimous decision taken at the level of the Commission to go to house to have the revision of the list, as Mr. Marcus put it, which could be done in the move of a house to house. So, was there a unanimous decision taken at the level of the Commission, or is this just a misrepresentation to the court by Mr. Marcus and the Attorney General?
It is a misrepresentation because there was no unanimous decision to hold house-to-house registration in the time that it is being advocated for now and almost executed, I understand. At all material times, the discussion centered around the holding of elections. At every meeting of the Commission, subsequent to, well, after the Commission reconvened, after the no confidence motion, the issue of elections was the primary focus of, well, when I say our attention, I mean myself and my other two colleagues, Commissioner Shanik and Ben. The other side, intent on delaying this process, pushed the issue of house-to-house election registration. Now, we've also seen the recent developments that have screamed across all of the headlines today, both on the traditional media and on social media, about the advice coming from the legal officer. And with your indulgence, I want to touch briefly on this.
Yes, sure.
The law provides, and this is a discussion that we've had at all times. In fact, that discussion found its way into amendments to the legislation last year by Act 10 of 2018, that the life of a list should be extended from 3 months to 6 months. And the law also states what happens upon the expiry of that list. The law states in Act 15 of 2000, and I'm quoting these acts not to confuse the public, but I'm quoting these acts to remind you that I'm not pulling these things out of thin air. The law is the law. You may not be happy with the law, but it remains the law until it is amended. And until such time that it is amended, you have a duty to comply with the law.
And abide by it.
And in this case, it puts a mandatory duty, Act 15 of 2000, puts a mandatory duty on the Commission of National Registration, who coincides with the Chief Elections Officer, that upon the expiry of a list, that steps should be taken by way of claims and objections to refresh that list. No such step was taken. And that was the basis of the advice that has recently surfaced from the legal officer to the Commission. Now, yesterday in the Commission, I had cause to say that an attempt is being made to crucify the messenger here in the form of the legal officer. I hold no brief for the legal officer, but the legal officer has a duty. One of the aspects of her job description is to advise the Commission on legal matters. The legal officer contended that she has made this opinion available to her direct report, which is the chairman, and to the Chief Elections Officer. It has never seen the light of day. Upon insistence and repeated insistence by Commissioner Bibi Shadik, the chairman, in the presence of the Commission, instructed the legal officer, because he said to Commissioner Shadik, the legal officer has heard you. And thereafter, this document was presented to us. And I understand the hue and cry that is being made about this document because the document does not coincide with the views of certain people on that commission. The entire document is being bastardized. The messenger, an attempt is being crucified. But yet, decisions such as unilateral decisions, such as hiring of lawyers to represent GECOM in a plethora of cases. One, there's a case brought by some remigrants against the commission in relation to this said
The
issue,
deregistration process.
the same issue of house-to-house registration. No, yesterday we asked in the commission for such pleadings whenever such legal proceedings are served on the commission for it to be made available to commissioners. We made that request yesterday. Other than reading about it in the public domain, and I happen to pay a particularly keen interest to them, sometimes I'd send to the court to get those public records, etc., to enlighten myself as to what is happening. We don't get these things. We don't get these things. And no discussion was ever had on one, who must be hired to represent the commission at both in both of those cases. No decision or discussion was had on the line that should be taken, by the commission in those matters. But yet, nothing is being, that is not a matter of concern. That is not a matter of concern to the commissioners who are now so concerned about an officer of the commission doing her job. Because of course, the product of her job does not coincide with your view.
No, I would just like to point out here that this entire thing, Article 106.6 and Article 106.7, the 3 months period that was given for elections, this came from the technical officers from GECOM itself when the amendments to the Constitution were being made. I'm not aware if you were at the commission at the time, but I'm sure you would have known that, and those same technical officers are there. So my question is that, is it possible, or was it possible that when the no confidence motion was passed and the Prime Minister and the government conceded, was it possible for the commission to hold an elections within that 3-month period? Had they started the work immediately?
We had a list, Rudy, that expired on the 30th of April. If we are to look at the time that, if we are to count 3 months from the 21st of December, it put us at the 21st of March. Clearly, the elections could have been held within that time. In fact, at the first or second meeting after the commission, because mind you, the commission did not meet for 1 month after the no confidence motion was passed. The chairman was sick, and the meeting was no meeting was held. So the first time we met after the no confidence motion, a month and a day had elapsed because it was on the 22nd of January that we met for the first time. Now, that being said, shortly thereafter, and I mean a day after the 22nd, and a proposal was put to us about holding elections with the current list within a short period. Yes. Before you know it, that proposal was pulled from our attention. The question I want to leave with right-thinking viewers is, why was that proposal pulled from the attention of the commission? Because at the time that was made available to us, and that is to say at the 22nd of January, there were, as far as I can recall, there was no legal proceeding launched at that time. There was no legal proceeding launched, and there was no impediment to the holding of elections within the appointed 90 days. And mind you, you asked the question, you don't know if I was on the commission at the time. Thankfully, when the Constitution was being amended in the 99-2000 process, I was in a far happier place in school and so on.
Okay.
But importantly, the framers of the Constitution must have taken into consideration the plethora of legislation that governs the holding of elections and registration, which are the two important mandates of the commission. One is to register you, The other one is to hold elections. The framers of the Constitution and those amendments must have taken into consideration all the legislation, particularly Representation of the People's Act, the amendments, and there were several amendments thereafter, which catered for the live list. And in recent times, during my time on the commission, we insisted that at all times we must have a valid list for the holding of elections.
Okay. To close out this segment of the program, can you give us an update on the outcomes of this week's statutory meeting?
Yeah, we have a few minutes
Yeah,
remaining.
we just have
Well,
about
I have touched on a lot of it. I have touched on a lot of it. And quite jocularly, someone asked me yesterday, what was the outcome of the, what happened? I said, it's the same, just a lot of the same old. Today, that person contacted me again and said, yesterday you told me that it was just a bit of the same old, and today's headlines are screaming that tempers flared in the commission. We're accustomed to that in the commission now. When people can't have their way in the commission, they resort to shouting and so on.
Yes.
Sometimes present company included. But the thing is, the law, as I said earlier, and the law is the law. Elections are statutory functions. Every aspect of an election,
Yes,
from how
indeed.
many days before you have to have nomination day, the entire process, it's a statutory process, which is all enshrined in black and white. It's not guesswork. And as a consequence, the holding of elections cannot change, or the method of holding elections, the timelines, etc., cannot change because of the whim and fancy of any one person.
So-
It is there and it ought to be followed. Like I said, it is the law until it has been changed. And it has not been changed, and we should be following the law.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunraj, and thank you for bringing insight to our viewers this evening. I'm sure a lot of them would have been adequately informed and updated about the position at GECOM, and more specifically, the position of the PPP GECOM commissioners, the position that they have with regards to a lot of these issues. So just to remind our viewers this evening, we did touch on our topic this evening, which was 4 years later, missteps and abuses expose the true nature of the APNU-AFC coalition government.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gunraj. I'm sure the viewers are more enlightened as to the struggle that our commissioners are going through there at the commission. Thank you all for being with us for the past hour or so. Before we go, I'd just like to remind you guys that for these, on these issues and much, much more, you get a copy of the Mirror newspaper, and you'll be able to read thoroughly on all these issues and a lot more issues. You'll get the party missive on issues, national important issues from the newspaper. Hope you join us again next week, and thank you all for being with us.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.